Life Force Tenka, or Codename Tenka depending on which continent you reside in, was released in 1997 by Psygnosis. Personally, I'd never even heard of it myself until I was paying $1 literal for it in an op shop somewhere, but I was drawn in by Psygnosis' namesake since all their games frickin' rock. It didn't take long to realise that it's not just a first-person shooter, but a first-person shooter on the PS1 in 1997. This is an important date to remember, considering the DualShock controller wasn't released until the November of 1997, while this game was released beforehand in May. Those in the know probably already know where I'm going with this, but for those who don't, this is the controller they used before the DualShock, and this is the DualShock. There are two main differences between the controllers, the first of which being the rumble feedback, but what's important to today's review is the dual analog thumbsticks. Any modern console FPS would have used something like these, but imagine if you could only use the digital buttons. Yep, this is an FPS shooter only using the digital buttons. Let's see how it handles.
Usually, that type of controller setup would terrify me and send me running to the hills, but I'm just gonna come out and say it. Psygnosis have done an okay job here. This game is actually playable, and for that, I congratulate them on a job well done. However, I have my special review structure to uphold, so I'm going to talk about the game's storyline first. To mention stuff in any other order would just push me off balance and stupefy me. The year is 2096, and with Earth gone to hell, off-world colonies have become the desirable place to exist. You play Joseph D. Tenka, who's some airhead Rambo type who's just arrived on a planet called Extruvius 328b. As he comes to realise though, that planet is used by an evil corporation called Trojan Incorporated to create something called Bionoids, which is a bio-army for Trojan to use for their own naughty deeds. Joe does not respect their wishes, so it's up to him to stop them and save the day. A bit standard I must admit, but it's not a bad storyline by any means. However, it's one you'll likely forget about as soon as you start playing. So anyway, the controls. How do they do it? Well, it isn't perfect by any means, but the diagonal buttons move Joe forward, backwards, and side to side. The L1 and L2 buttons look up and down as well, but what really makes this a playable shooter is the semi-auto lock-on. The speed at which you can move and look around is balanced enough that you're not twitching all over the place, or on the other hand struggling to move fast enough in time, but it's not 100% perfect for reasons I'll get into in a second. The slight lock-on really helps with that last leg of aiming that's hard to do without analog controls, so you can shoot where you're meant to, and the lock-on graphics also make the enemies stand out a bit more, as I'm guessing that would blend into the background a bit too much otherwise. The weapons you use also has a laser sight, which while probably there just to look nice, also adds a little bit more help to aim. The solutions aren't a total fix however, as I wish you could adjust the sensitivity of rotating and looking behind you. It's so slow to do a full 180, and that can really put you at a disadvantage if there are enemies behind you. Another control mechanic I didn't like was the strafing. You have to hold down R2 and then a directional button, which is a bit more cumbersome than I would have liked. In the heat of a firefight where you're dodging projectiles, that extra thought process to hold down R2 to strafe was something I simply couldn't get a hang of. The fault may very well be on my end, but I don't see why strafing couldn't have had its own dedicated buttons. Looking at the controls layout, it would have been something very easy to implement and fit in. Otherwise, the controls are quite standard. You can run, you can jump, and you can also crouch. The latter really impressing GameSpot in 1997. I don't really understand why, but apparently this was a huge deal at the time. I guess it was something missing from comparable games that I haven't really noticed before. There isn't a traditional set of individual weapons to collect in Codename Tenka, but instead a single weapon that is upgradable to do many things. It's basically like a whole bunch of different weapons as you play anyway, but I guess it's an interesting way to present them at least. You start off with the traditional gun, with upgrades eventually giving you a proton gun type thing, a missile launcher, and grenades. The upgrades are a bit tricky to find, but it's very worth exploring around to find them. I'm sure the game could be beaten with just the initial weapon, but you'd be making it a lot harder on yourself. The ammo on the other hand is everywhere. I don't think I ever ran out of ammo for anything except for the missiles. The game really spoils you in that regard. The nature of the level design made using the missiles tricky however. I had a hard time not blowing myself up when using them, since this is a corridor shooter after all. You know, full of corridors. It would more likely than not hit the side of a wall in close proximity rather than an enemy, but oh well. The enemies, while not showing any smarts at all apart from the ability to shoot on sight, are at least quite varied in their appearance and attacks. The lack of smarts is made up by the fact that you'll be on your toes enough to not just be shooting mindlessly, you'll always be paying attention to which enemy you're facing against because different things need to be considered depending on who you're up against. Do you risk running right up to it and zapping it up close? Or do you know it has an attack that will just about total you in one shot and it's safer to try and take it out from a distance? The choice is yours, and even though this seems like a simple thing that should be in all FPSs, sadly that's not the case with many of them, especially in the 1990s. The levels are large, multi-level sprawling mazes, and there are a lot of them. This game has over 20 levels, which are all mostly huge, so you'll get a lot to play for a long time if you decide to get into Codename Tenka. To avoid getting lost, this game offers location beacons that can be dropped at any time if you find something you think you'll need to come back to. These show up on the map, make a lot of noise, but also flash and illuminate the rooms in real time, which is a real treat for a game of this vintage. Apart from looking pretty though, they are a useful and welcome part to the game since the levels are so large and sometimes confusing to navigate. There are puzzles in the levels too, but they mostly consist of finding a key or something that resembles and acts like a key. Otherwise, don't know what to do with something? Then shoot it. Don't know where that wall panel is to activate something? Well, wander around until you hear the beeping. It doesn't really get any simpler than that. While the puzzles aren't a hindrance or unwelcome, it would have been nice if they were a bit trickier, as run and gun gameplay does get a bit stale on its own eventually. The graphics in Codename Tenka are quite good, although when I first started I could hardly see much at all. There is no menu option to adjust the brightness, so I had to do it in both the settings of my TV and my capturing software. Increasing the brightness may affect the mood the game is trying to convey, but if I can't see what I'm doing then I'm not going to play it. There are a few other nice visual treats included too, like fully polygonal enemies. At the time, many other games had 2D scaling sprites, so it's pretty impressive, especially on the PS1 in the late 90s. The lighting effects really stood out to me as well, like the previously mentioned laser pointer and location beacons. The overall lighting of the levels was well done too, really conveying the type of environments I assume Psygnosis were aiming for. The cutscenes are of an acceptable quality level too. While looking a bit tacky these days, from my experience of the PlayStation this is about as great as I get. I guess the system could only be utilised so far. The voice acting is pretty decent too, if a bit overly dramatic at times. It's easily not the best I've ever heard, but it's a long way from cringy. The music is pretty great too, being somewhere between what you'd expect on a Rush album and 1990s electronica. A weird comparison I know, but if you listen to it, you'll get what I mean. It's easy to see Psygnosis loves their techno when their Wipeout series is considered, and even though there are no licensed artists, Mike Clark, who created the music, really should be patting himself on the back. Plus, the music can be played off a game disc in a conventional CD player. That's a feature I really miss in modern games for sure.
Codename or Lifeforce Tenka is a generic FPS on the surface, but there is nothing inherently wrong with it. It is fun to play, even if there are no frills attached, and there's plenty of levels to keep you going until you want to play something else. Multiplayer is certainly missed, and the controls aren't 100% perfect, but they're definitely admirable considering the controller that was available at the time. Psygnosis have made something that's very playable here, and I think it's well worth checking out if you like first-person shooters on the PlayStation 1.
Hello retro gamers, and thank you so much for watching today's review. On RetroGameOn.com recently, I've reminisced about my childhood game store, Ultimate Games. I talk about what I liked about it, and also discuss as to why I think it closed down. I also delve into the world of Famiclone carts in a separate post, along with about 250 other posts, so if you want to check those out then click the logo in this video, the link in the description, or by simply directly visiting www.retrogameon.com. Regardless, I just want to say thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.